So President Tinubu unveils his first budget presentation to the National Assembly. A highly optimistic and rather aggressive state expenditure plan for 2024. It's clearly full of direct borrowing, with the government aiming to spend considerably more than Nigeria currently has finance for, and taking an optimistic view over the future direction of oil prices, inflation and economic growth, even as debt service is expected to gulp 45% of the budget. Nevertheless, President Tinubu has described the plan as the rock upon which he intends to erect the foundation of Nigeria. And you have to wonder why, after 63 years of independence, they're still stuck at the foundations and still reliant on importation. And breaking it down further, Mr. Tinubu said the budget was an attempt to address infrastructure deficit issues and enhance human capital development, with internal security getting priority, as does education, including the student loan scheme. He talked about greater climate action, greater transparency and accountability, and implementing business-friendly measures to attract investment.
The budget we now present constitute a foundation upon which we shall erect the future of this great nation. Analyzing prevailing economic environment, economic condition remains challenging both abroad and at home. Despite lingering post-COVID supply and production bottlenecks, armed conflict in various parts of the world, and restrictive monetary policies in major economies, we expect global growth to hover around 3.0% in year 2024. This relative low rate has significant implications for our economy due to our current reliance on importation.
So a little snippet there of President Tinubu presenting his 2024 budget to the National Assembly. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Lagos by one of Nigeria's foremost economists, Bismarck Rewane, CEO of Financial Derivatives. Mr. Rewane, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Someone on Twitter described this budget as being as far from renewed hope as you could possibly go, suggesting that it is full of fiscal holes, is not a social contract, but is the usual tax, spend and borrow that we saw with President Buhari. I mean, what stock do you take of that budget? What's your top line analysis of it?
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening, Nigerians. I think the budget was well written. The language was lucid, but it's the name, the Budget of Renewed Hope, seems to be the title of the manifesto of the election. So, again, the budget is a tool of economic management, not a tool of political management. That's the first point. But it's a plan. It's a financial plan, and you see, Benjamin Franklin says, if you fail to plan, then you end up planning to fail. But the basic facts, there are 5 things you look at in a budget, in a country's budget. 1, how much are you going to earn? This time, we are projecting to earn 18.32 trillion naira, up significantly from what it was in the past. Why? Because the price of oil, the exchange rate at which we are going to convert the oil proceeds in, and then also mobilizing corporate income taxes and others. On the other hand, how much are we going to spend? We are going to spend 27.5 trillion naira. This is significantly higher. It's about almost 25.9%, I think, up from last year. Now, but then how much is the deficit? The deficit is 9.18 trillion, which actually is about 3.8% of GDP. Last year, the deficit, the actual planned deficit was about 6 trillion. In actuality, we did about 7 trillion. So this budget is a modest, prudent budget from that to that extent. Then the budget as a tool of economic management is a key issue. How have we used this in the past to achieve our objectives? But also, when you actually take the budget amounts in real terms, you would see that whilst we had a 25% increase in expenditure in naira terms, in dollar terms, there's a 14% drop from 2022 to today. Because in dollar terms, the peak was about $33 billion, but now it's about $23 billion, depending on what exchange rate you use. So in reality, Nigeria's expenditure, and that's federal government alone, is actually declining because of exchange rate pressures and failure to optimize growth. So now let us look at exactly how Nigeria has been performing. But before we look at the performance over the years, a couple of assumptions that were made in this budget. One is that we expect to grow at 3.76%, which is laudable. It's actually higher than the rate of growth of population. We are projecting that the oil price will be $77.85. Therein lies the problem. Today, the price of oil is $80 a barrel. Usually, your benchmark price gives you enough headroom. In other words, about almost 10 or 15%. If the spot price of Brent today is 90, you would actually have a benchmark price of about almost 75 to give you room just in case the prices drop. There's an OPEC meeting going to take place, I think, tomorrow. And failure to agree on any output constraints or whatever it is, we could see the spot oil price drop below our benchmark price. And that would send a very wrong signal. The production target is 1.78 million barrels of oil a day. This is almost equal, or higher than OPEC quota. Last year, we produced average of 1.35 million barrels a day. So, to a large extent, the assumptions and the exchange, there's one other major assumption, the exchange rate of 750 naira to a dollar. And if that is the budget benchmark exchange rate you're going to use throughout the year, it is hoped that with the reforms, the exchange rate will begin to move towards its purchasing power parity value, which is about almost 800 naira to a dollar. If that assumption fails to materialize, and there's evidence to show that it might not materialize, then you begin to create elements of macroeconomic instability. But having said that, the people that crafted the budget were pretty realistic and in so doing. Now, let me mention some points. As a tool of economic management, what has been the history of Nigerian budgets? The budget is always crafted by people who just say, here's the amount we're going to earn, this amount we're going to spend. And budget accomplishment is measured by how much you spend, not by how much you achieve in terms of spending and the quality of the spending. More so, the budget as a tool of economic management. So let me tell you what happened. In 2022, the target for growth was 4.2%. The actual growth was 3.25%. In 2023, the budget for growth was 3.75%. Today, we are at 2.45%. So we underperformed the growth target. The oil price we budgeted for was $57 in 2022. Actual oil price was $98 a barrel. 2023, it was $75 budgeted for, we had 83. So we had more, the price was higher than what we budgeted for. But when it came to production, we were way below. We projected production of oil at 1.8 million barrels in 2022. We actually achieved only 1.2, thanks to oil theft. In 2023, we budgeted we will produce 1.69 million barrels, but we produced only 1.32. And this is where it gets interesting. The exchange rate we put in the budget in 2022 was 410 naira to a dollar. In actuality, we got 740. So the actual exchange rate in the market was about 80% below the budget exchange rate. In 2023, we budgeted 435. And you know what the exchange rate is today? 1,158. So the budget of last year, this time last year, when the president was announcing his budget, he was assuming that the exchange rate would be 435 naira to a dollar. Today, it is 3 times that. It's 300% less, less than what it is. The inflation target in 2022 was 13%. Actual inflation from official sources was 21%. In 2023, we had an inflation target of 16.98. Actual inflation today is 27.33. That's official. In the synthetic basket, we're getting more like 40%. So what to do about it? What are we going to do about this? And what do we expect?
We're going to come to that
I think
just
the
a
question.
minute. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting analysis, and of course typical of the work that you do, very thorough. You talked there about downside risks to global oil prices, the production of oil, keeping in mind, of course, that crude oil is Nigeria's biggest export. You talked about inflation moderating. Well, the president certainly talked about inflation moderating from 27.33% to just over 21% in 2024, and the economy growing by nearly 4%, which to some extent you don't think, certainly in terms of inflation, is very realistic. 45% of the total budget, Bismarck, is debt service. I mean, there's not much they can do about that, is there? Because that's money that's already been borrowed. So when you factor in debt service and recurrent expenditure, that's more than 80% of the budget. So very little actually left for capital expenditure.
Yes, that is true. But you see, you're talking about 45% is a major improvement from where we were. And the reason why it has happened isn't because of anything miraculous. It's because subsidies have been reduced significantly, one. Two, the exchange rate at which we convert the dollars that the government owns or earns is at a higher rate than what it was last year. But in terms of productivity, I do not think that this budget actually addresses the issues of productivity, because you need to debottleneck the economy because there are constraints and impediment to growth. And these impediments include bureaucratic bottlenecks, civil service lethargy, and obstacles to productivity, roadblocks, and so many other things. But the reality is that the federal government finances, the public finances, only about 54%, 52 to 54% of total fiscal financing in Nigeria. The states and local governments have another 48%, so to speak. And if you think the federal government is even fiscally prudent, which I think they are compared to the state government finances are in a pretty much bizarre, or what I would call extremely fragile and failing state than what is happening in the federal government. So when you now begin to take the borrowing environment, we want to test these assumptions and tell you that if interest rates are going to increase, as I've heard the central bank governor say, in the tightening cycle, then the debt service you are projecting today, I am not so sure that it has taken into consideration the fact that these interest rates will increase. But what gives me comfort is that I think eventually, very soon, we'll come to the realization and have to accept it, whether we like it or not, inconveniently for that matter, that we will have to meet with our creditors, and including the IMF, to restructure our debt to give us some breathing room. Because the economic frustrations that are going to be let out on the streets by people who are paying higher prices and for the problems that we see today may not be bearable. So it is almost imperative, almost inevitable, that we have to restructure our debt, and that will give us some breathing room to invest, one, in capital expenditure, two, to increase the productivity, and more than anything else, achieve optimal growth, accelerated and optimal growth.
And what about the revenue expectations? I mean, do you think they're overly ambitious? I mean, can they achieve their projection?
Well, you see, in the land of the blind, everybody in one man's eye, a one-eyed man is a king. The reality is that even when you take the 27 trillion naira, 27 trillion naira is less than 12% of the GDP of this country. That is what the federal government, is spending. And it's not going to have an impact whatsoever on the lives of people. We have to be more ambitious. You see, your total expenditure is $23 billion. The president said, I want to achieve $1 trillion economy in 8 years. To do that, you need to grow at about 8 or 9% a year. Even this ambitious budget is talking about 3.76. You are 5% below what you require as a minimum. So one thing is nominal values, which is, yes, it has gone up by 25%, but what does nominal value mean? When you dollarize it, you find that you've actually, your expenditure this year is 14% less than last year. It's like when everybody keeps on clapping that we've done very well in the Nigerian stock market, we've gone up by 38%. Please discount the exchange rate depreciation, and what you get is you are minus, around -5 or -6. You are underwater. So, look, I don't want to sound like a party pooper, and all of that, but the reality is that this is a very steep hill to climb.
Well, I mean, you talked about being a party pooper. I don't think anybody thinks of you as a party pooper. I think most people think of you as a realist and the kind of reality check that Nigerians need. So I would like to ask you this, because you were getting to the solutions. What would you advise the National Assembly? What would you advise the National Assembly to change and modify in that budget as they begin the process of scrutinizing it to make it more relevant to the critical needs of this country?
First and foremost, I think the National Assembly and everybody, when we talk about the National Assembly, it's a group of guys who are there to do what they think their role is. Look, every Nigerian has to move from the ideal street to the real street. We've got to make the mental adjustment more difficult than the fiscal adjustment. To accept that Nigeria is not a rich country, that Nigeria has to move from being a natural wealth economy to becoming a produced wealth economy, and that productivity is a goal to achieving growth. You can balance your budget, you can fund yourself, you can print all the money you like. In the end, you are going to have higher inflation, lower productivity, and more tension on the streets. So we got to accept that and convince the people that this is not a rich country. This is a country that has work to do. And we will work hard and we will lead by example. We must throw away all the profligacy that is being talked about, even though they're not major, But the signal you're sending, the anchoring expectations of the people are under pressure. They are suffering. They're buying a loaf of bread for 1,300 or 1,500. They're buying a bag of rice for 60,000. And they don't even have the money to do that. So how do we increase productivity? How do we increase the earning power? Because built into this budget is also a ultimate wage review at all levels, both in the public and private sectors. So there's some hard thinking to be done and hard convincing of ourselves that we are not a wealthy nation and we cannot stop living on the fast lane. Because what happens to people who live on the fast lane? They get knocked over. So what next?
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, we must come to terms with our creditors. We must accept. We cannot be allergic or have a phobia for the IMF. We must begin to reschedule our debt and carry out institutional and policy reform. Not policy announcements only, but institutional and policy reform. Restructure our markets. Allow interest rates move in a direction that will bring fiscal neutrality. And more than anything else, restructure the foreign exchange market auctioning system so that there's a transparent market and so that the currency can begin to appreciate gradually towards its aligned value, what we call the real effective exchange rate path. The path. We need to do that. We need to be very clear in our minds. First of all, convince ourselves that we're not rich and that there's work to be done. Show the signals by not living like sheikhs, but living like people who are ready to fold up their sleeves. 3, we must be honest with ourselves and honest with the people. What is happening? There's too much dishonesty in the land. So we need to come clean to the people. And that way people are willing to make a sacrifice if they know that everybody, there's what we call comparable burden sharing. When we do that, then we stand a chance. And quite frankly, I am optimistic, cautiously optimistic for that matter, that the recovery path is here, but there's a lot of work to be done. More of the mental work of accepting our new reality than the physical work and the sacrifices to be made.
And when you say, Bismarck, that you're cautiously optimistic, does that mean that you agree with the president that this budget is the start of the process to restore macroeconomic stability and alleviate the pains of things like subsidy removal?
Yes, I don't think the budget was aimed to targeting to remove the pain. It is the question that if you recycle the revenues that come from budget subsidy removal and recycle it efficiently and optimize the resources, then you will get outcome. But just taking subsidies away from people is not an answer. It doesn't do anything. All you have done is to take money from the pockets of people and put it in the hands of governments who are using it for palliatives, and the palliatives are being stolen. So that's a very simplistic answer to a very complex problem. You know, we talk about kitchen simplicity in urban complexity. So this is what it is. So it's not a binary choice that, oh, once you agree with this or you don't agree with that. I know that this fundamentally is a strong budget, but in terms of its materiality, its impact on a GDP of 230 trillion, we are talking about 27 trillion naira. That's a drop. And if you multiply that by 2 and say all the state governments are spending more, then you see that. But I want Nigerians to understand something, that in an economy, there's what we call the injections, which is what comes in, and leakages, which is what goes out. If the injections are not as potent as the leakages, then you find the economy will be like a car that has a leaking exhaust pipe. You hear a lot of sound and no motion. That is what's going to happen. So we need to, first of all, change the exhaust pipe so that there are no leakages. Secondly, change the compression of the engine so that we can move faster, optimize the resources, and make sure that Nigeria is a better place than what it is over the past 20 lousy years.
Bismarck, a reality check as always from you. Thank you very much indeed. Bismarck Rewane is one of Nigeria's foremost economists, and he's the CEO of Financial Derivatives, and he was talking to me there from our studios in Lagos.